Welcome to the Home Building Hub, your essential podcast guide to building your new home. Hosted by industry experts Colin Bischoff and Darren Brennan, this conversational podcast will help better educate you about all things new home building so you can avoid costly mistakes and enjoy your building experience to the fullest, no matter which home builder you choose.
Hey there, folks. Welcome to the Home Building Hub. You're with Colin and co-host Darren Brennan, as always. And I guess for those listeners out there, if you're wondering how the market's really going, we've got a really good episode for you today. So we've got a really well-researched, factual, and I guess hot off the press market update coming your way in this episode. So we have a special guest to take us through current market information, high level on the ground, long-term land supply across Geelong and Melbourne. We're going to talk a little bit about an Earless Dragon, how that's holding up about 300,000 homes. We're going to give an insight into what are called DCPs, so Development Contribution Plans, what they are and what the benefits, I guess, to everyone is. And I guess the ultimate question, is now a good time to buy? So what I'd like to do is welcome our guest. We'll introduce him. So his name's Ben Stewart. Ben is the project marketing director from a company called Core Projects. Now, Ben has a wealth of experience over the years. We've known him for a number of years ourselves, but he started sort of in the real estate and then moved through, and that was in Barry Plant, then moved through selling land through Geelong, Armstrong Creek. And I guess we've seen him rise through the ranks at Core, from, I guess, a state manager right through to his role now as a project marketing director. So Ben's also a committee member of UDIA in Victoria. So that's Urban Development Institute of Australia. So yeah, quite a wealth of knowledge. So we're going to give you a great update from Ben. I just want to also, Darren, I want to highlight Core Projects as well, because they're not just a company that just sells land. It's not that simple. So they do a few things around property, land sales, a lot of research. Projects is what we're going to talk about today, greenfield sales, things like that. I just want to highlight that they're not just a typical business. They're heading towards a net zero position. So far, they're already 100% carbon neutral. They're also what's called B Corp certified. So essentially that means they're recognised for their high standards around social, environmental performance, accountability, legal commitment, transparency, and the list goes on. So it's really good. I mean, to hear that about a business, Daz, I think it's something that doesn't get highlighted enough. So I really want to make an effort to point that out there for Ben and for the respective business he works for and the guys that own it and run it. So, yeah.
Mate, it's fantastic to have you on board, Ben. And, mate, it's great to have a leader, not only yourself as a leader in the industry, but also Core as a leader in the industry in terms of where they're heading, setting the new bar around those sort of social and environmental approach, mate. It's very cool. But welcome, mate. I know you're good in front of the camera, Ben. We see you online a bit. So it's good, mate. Looking forward to hearing what you've got to tell us hot off the press, as Colin said, which is going to be awesome.
Nah, thanks, guys. Really appreciate the opportunity. And you're right, I do like getting in front of a camera. It wasn't always the way, but many Instagram posts and videos over the years when I was down at Warrilla, you sort of get used to the awkwardness of watching yourself on camera, and probably there's a slight pleasure when you feel like it's gone really, really well. I really appreciate actually you guys sort of starting off highlighting some of the stuff that Core are doing. When I first came across to Core, it would sort of stark contrast for the previous place I worked with, but in a nutshell, the Nick and James and Steve, so they're the owners of the business. Their philosophy is they sort of want to do good. Now, obviously, we're in sales, and obviously it's all about you want to make money. We want to build nice communities. We want to have team members that enjoy coming to work. I love coming to work. People talk about work-life balance. I don't have a work-life balance because I love what I do, but I also love working with the people I do. We're all a bit different, and that's probably when I first started with those guys, not for this to be sort of just a whole spruik piece about Core Projects, but I certainly found my people. And we are trying to do different things. Like that research piece, the guys invested over $1 million to build a piece of reporting software, which is called Grip, which is a game changer. It's something that if you have access to that, you can basically every month you can watch the market, the ups and downs, the different lots that get sold, what's selling first. You can compare different corridors, different estates. It's an amazing piece of software. And in the not too distant future, we'll start to roll in medium density. But it's great to work with a group of people that will look at a problem and go, right, well, that's what everyone's doing. What can we do differently? So yeah, thanks for acknowledging that, because they are really passionate about that. It's not a tick the box. We've got a whole program where we look at a lot of that stuff to make sure that even to the extent, and not to sort of go too much on about this, but things like in my email footer, it says he, him. So originally when there was the feedback about basically sort of potentially putting that footer, I didn't necessarily think it was necessary. And I had a chat to one of my team members, one of my younger team members, and she sort of explained sort of her position. We felt comfortable enough to talk about that. And from that point, I thought, all right, well, that actually sort of makes sense. So we have honest discussions. We'll have a core commune every month. We just did a session with Elephant Ed, which if you don't know those guys, do some Googling. That was really interesting. But yeah, we do a lot of that stuff. We're really excited. So
They're saying Elephant Ed jump in with a lot of the schools actually. So
yeah,
something through that, which is interesting. Yeah, it's certainly. Yeah, I was going to say, I thought you might have shown up with a grip T-shirt on that Grant was pimping around at the UDIO lunch the other day, actually. So,
well, I didn't get offered one, to be honest. Obviously, it went to Oscar. So that was you were at the lunch yesterday, or not yesterday, Thursday,
a couple of days ago. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
I thought you might have been wearing one. I was like, this will be good. He'll have his grip shirt.
No, I didn't.
But it is a pretty impressive project that you guys are working on, and that leads into a whole lot of the conversation we're sort of going to head down the path of, I guess, which is, the current market conditions, because that's mapping all of that. How do you see that sort of tracking at the moment, the current market conditions? Tell us all about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's how I sort of we're going sideways for the most part. There was the spike which you guys would have experienced with the NCC changes. Like if you look at April, May sales, obviously they spiked and then pulled back in June. I mean, the good thing is the second quarter was the best quarter since May 2022. So some NCC stuff's in there. So if you look at sort of trends, the sort of sideways action that the whole Greenfields market across Metro Melbourne and Geelong has for the most part been going sideways since sort of 2022. So there have been some improvement. From a sales point of view, yeah, I mean, it's ticking over. What we sort of look at the moment is so leads. So has there been any spike in leads? Leads are pretty consistent. Connection rates up. So we're happy about that. So there's more people that are happy to respond to, and I don't know whether you guys are sort of seeing that from your end.
Absolutely.
And then physical walk-ins through displays is also up. That's probably the other metric that we certainly I sort of look at. If you're getting people coming through the display, especially if the weather's a bit off, like it'd be really interesting to see who walks through land offices and obviously displays across this weekend. Like the weather's pretty terrible. If you get people come through today, it probably means there's a level of, we want to do something. I think the other thing from a market point of view that we've really, really focused on is that sub-market. So there's a significant amount of titled stock on developer price lists across all projects. And you see that obviously in Geelong as well. That stuff is transacting. The sub-market, so if you go onto realestate.com, that's what I'm talking about, and you go land in Geelong or Armstrong Creek, is that market transacting? So in Armstrong Creek, as an example, over the last 12 months, there's probably an average of 10 titled resales on realestate.com have been selling. Now, if that was a project, that was probably the best performed project in Armstrong Creek over that period of time. So that's pleasing. So if we can get through the titled stock, you start to see new releases, which is the traditional greenfields market, which is land goes on sale today, but is not going to title for maybe 12 to 18 months. Why is that really important for the market? That's perfect for a first home buyer. They can put down a deposit. There's some amazing incentives out there at the moment, which we can obviously touch on later. But it gives that person, put down the deposit, buy a block of land at today's price, and then you don't have to settle for 12 to 18 months. Gives the person time to save, potentially use one of the amazing government deposit initiatives out there. But it also potentially, whether you're a first-time buyer or investor, it hopefully gets you over the hump of the interest rates. And that's probably the other thing. I mean, if you asked me 2 years ago if I knew anything about inflation, I don't reckon I would. I've said, I don't know about you guys, maybe you were across inflation, I wasn't. Why is unemployment a key barometer in regards to inflation, all that sort of stuff? Seems, because I'm pretty obsessed, it seems like the narrative might have changed maybe in the last couple of weeks. I think the inflation data a couple of days ago was pretty good. There's 2 out of the 4 big banks are still predicting a rate reduction this year. That's what we need. So I certainly think from a market point of view, sideways. But once, and to be honest, if you're a buyer and you wait for the announcement that the rates have been reduced, you've missed a trick. But once that happens, that's the go signal. Like, it'll be a different story. I don't know whether you guys are seeing it, but we're getting plenty of inquiry. It's just they're at the top of the funnel. Like, they're in their investigation phase. They're doing their due diligence. Some of them don't necessarily want to talk to us. But when that go signal happens, you'll start to see that market really kick, which then ties into obviously one of the other topics I know we're going to talk about, which is land supply.
I think, Ben, also the interest rates, the fixed interest rates, we're starting to see some movement.
Yeah.
And that's the first movement, right? And that also interest being paid by banks for people with money in the bank is also getting reduced. So they're gearing up for a change.
Yeah.
Like, they don't do that unless they think change is coming.
Yeah.
So, they're risk adverse in that respect, and they're there to make money. So, they start doing that to gain market share. They start doing that to deliver some level of confidence around that. And so, I think all the big banks now have moved their fixed interest rates. And is it just a marketing ploy or not? Doesn't matter. It adds confidence to the market.
Well, it does. I think just the other thing we were sort of, we were having conversations with developers I was looking at some presentations to some sales and marketing meetings. So sort of 2002, first, second quarter, we were having conversations with developers about peak pricing. So if you bought a block of land, say May 2002, in any project across Victoria, you've paid the highest possible price. And there wasn't really any incentives at that time, and there was no reason for that. So if you then fast forward, so from sort of, let's say if you bought a block of land in April, May, I'm pretty sure, was the first interest rate rise. And then there's obviously rises across 2022 and 2023. So we could all see what was going to happen. So the big fear in our industry is land gets sold at a certain price, and then people can't settle. Potentially there's valuation issues, which is a normal part of any type of market, especially when you see the acceleration of price, which is driven by not enough supply to meet peak demand. So the concern was, and this is why I sort of spoke about that, the title land component, is you're going to get a flood of land on the market and it's just going to sit there. And that's going to be a massive obstacle for the market to rebalance and start to move forward again. We're past peak pricing. If you go, and if obviously you've got access to GRIP, you'll notice that certainly across 2023, there's been some spikes in lots coming back from developers. It's happening in all corridors. We're through that for the most part, which is really pleasing. And I know a lot of the projects we worked on, one specifically, one in Geelong, we were really, really happy with the settlement rate, which is good because you want people to settle, you want people to build, obviously, houses. It just means that we're potentially in a much better position than what we thought we would be to then take advantage of when that next market upswing happens. And it does. You guys, avid property watchers, it's not rocket science. It's up, and then it's down, and then it's up, and it's down. And where we are is we're at the bottom. So, as you said, Darren, it's those key indicators which would give people confidence, consumer confidence, that we're on the way again.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's quite an interesting point you make around um, if you wait for the interest rate cut, then you might have missed a trick because, yeah, I mean, none of us have the crystal ball, right? We don't know what is going to happen exactly. But at the moment, and we've shared a bit before, there's plenty of good deals out there for land because people, there's rebates and this and that, good blocks out there for sale. And it's a good time to buy a block of land, in my opinion. And I know Darren agrees with that. It's just
Absolutely.
like some people are sitting there a little bit hesitant right
Yeah,
now, and perhaps for those who are going to get enough information out of this episode to learn that now is probably a good time. But we'll cover a bit of that as the last question with you, Ben. What
yeah,
about, I guess, the long term plan? Let's talk about those who are not quite ready and they're thinking, okay, well, tell me about what's going to happen down the track. What
yeah,
what about the long term land supply? Maybe Geelong, Melbourne. What does this 70-30
yeah, yeah, sure.
ratio mean?
So it was, I suppose, and I preface by saying the 70-30 split currently just applies to Metro Melbourne. Um, Geelong, from my understanding, hasn't necessarily settled on an official split, and potentially maybe it's more 50-50. I know, I think Ballarat's sort of 50-50. So what it means is the percentage of sales that you get from either greenfields is what obviously we predominantly work in, and then
Which really is the
more sort of
outside of
infill, brownfield. Yeah. So traditionally, greenfields there's always been a higher percentage, and basically the reason being it's generally sort of cleared land for the most part, so easy to develop. You sort of have to bring the infrastructure out there, but you don't necessarily have, say, a group of neighbours that don't want development in their street. They love how their street is, and there's no benefit for them to be enthusiastic about a mid-rise apartment building coming in. Now, there might be a necessity for that, but it's always been much more difficult to develop sort of infill. So what the Labor government had come up with, I think it might have been maybe 18 months, maybe 2 years ago, is there was always this 70-30 that was in the planning documents, but it was never necessarily sort of a hard and fast rule. So they pretty much said, no, 70-30 Metro Melbourne. So what that meant was the VPA, so the Victorian Planning Authority, they had to really pivot from a funding point of view, their team, what they're sort of focused on. There's a document that listed all of the sort of planned PSP, so precinct structure plan. So a precinct structure plan is a detailed document that basically says, all right, well, this new suburb, these are all the things that sort of go in it. And it takes a really long time to develop. If you look at, say, Lovely Banks, which I help those developers on that's part of the Alco Road East PSP. That's an active PSP in Geelong. And then there's also the Cremery Road ESP, which I'll touch on in a bit about that. But it could take, sometimes these things take decades. For instance, with Lovely Banks, the development director I work with, he got on board and came across 2 years ago to sort of shepherd the project through. From him starting 2 years ago, there's actually been a further 2 years delay, which we can talk about some of those reasons. But what the 70-30 split was, and this then sort of plays into a bit about the opportunity, if you're obviously thinking of buying land, is a lot of the PSPs which are in the pipeline have been paused. Okay, so they're basically saying we want that PSP to go ahead, that one. There's one in Wallen, which has basically just been stopped. So it just means a lot of the future supply is in limbo because they obviously want to do that pivot. Now, there's some really sensible reasons as to why you would want to try and unlock land in this sort of more inner ring. The issue with it is about the supply piece. So, as I said earlier, and as you guys know, the market's cyclical. Yep. And the reason why pricing escalates, right, and everyone goes, it's developers. Developers obviously put the price up. Well, they do because it's a business, and builders do the same thing. But price escalates and gets out of control, which is what happened at the back end of the last market cycle in Geelong, is if there's not enough supply in the drawer ready to go as that peak demand surges. Because it's not one consistent, it would be amazing if it was, one consistent level, buyers come in, buyers buy land. If there's enough supply, if there's enough buyers, it will naturally sort of regulate. It's the same as the rental market. If you've got enough rental stock, you've got enough tenants, it's going to keep under control. So with that flip, it means that it's going to be much more, the long-term land supply piece in the Greenfields market is going to be much more difficult. There's going to be less supply. It's going to take longer to bring to market. Obviously, if you're a developer that's got land in an active PSP, it probably adds a bit of value. It does then mean that the state government, and I think they're trying to, they need to really work with the councils, because ultimately it's the councils on the ground that are either the ones that unlock this or the ones that don't unlock it. Because if you're an elected council person, who are you obligated to respond to? You're obligated to respond to the person that put you in to the council. And that person's generally, and I use my wife as an example, right? There's a big block next to where I live, right? Originally, the council owned it. They were going to look at selling it, and they were going to put some townhomes in there. She was horrified, didn't want to do it. There was a group of people that got together, they did a petition, and they stopped it. It's going to be a nice playground. It's going to be great for us living in there if you've got obviously younger kids. Doesn't help the supply piece. So 70-30 split. I think there's reasons why they're doing it. If I had the power, it should be 50-50. In Geelong, potentially is 50-50. That's not necessarily the issue in Geelong when we talk about land supply. The issue is the length of time it's taking to get the new PSPs to the north and west of Geelong. So it's about 120,000 people that are supposed to call that portion of Geelong home, right? And that was supposed to be operating at the same time as Armstrong Creek. They were supposed to be running concurrently. Why were they supposed to be running concurrently? So there was enough supply to cater for peak demand. And that's not going to happen. Like, there is going to be a gap. At this stage, I would think with Lovely Banks, you're probably looking at the first block's not going to be sold till maybe early 2027. And then you guys, how long does it take? So you've got block of land, you've sold the block of land, 18 months to title, probably new release, might take a bit longer. Let's say, what are we looking at? So we're looking mid-2028. So we settle on the land, we own the block of land. How long would it take to build the house? Varies.
6 months, say, depending on the size of the home. 6 to 12.
2029.
Yeah.
So I know we're sort of part of the way in the decade. That's when the first bit of supply is going to come online then. So there's a heap of reasons. I think we can obviously sort of chat about that. But the real opportunity is, and it's all about scarcity. If you've got something that there is going to be a structural long-term issue in regards to that supply coming through, what do we think is going to happen with that product that you've got? So you've got land. And if there's not a finite supply of land, what's going to happen? It's going to go up.
Yeah. I think the other bit, Ben, in all of that is there'll be a shift in what people are looking for. So if they're forced to go inner urban, then that'll mean often they're going to have to move from a traditional home, maybe into a townhouse or into an apartment, etc. So that, you're going to see a shift in terms of, affordability is the biggest issue right now. And the only way someone who moves from the outer suburbs in a 4-bedroom home to the middle of the city is to move into an apartment. So, and what does that look like? 1 or 2 better. Maybe you've got a car space, maybe you don't. So it's just a shift in the market generally. And that's...
Yeah, and it's also like price point. Like, if I look at, if you're in a ring, like I look at some of the new apartment buildings that have popped up in Geelong. Like, I was looking at one a couple of years ago. It was a 2-bedder, because I was umming and ahhing about buying a townhome. I wanted to put something in a self-managed super fund. This was 3 years ago? It was $650 for a 2-bedder in Geelong. Like, for starters, I've got 3 kids and a wife and a mother-in-law. How am I going to fit them in a 2-bedroom unit, in a 2-bedroom townhome? Yeah. And it's not like, that was the other benefit of greenfields is it was and it is to a certain extent, sort of changed a little bit, but that was the mechanism to supply affordable housing. And I think so, I feel like sometimes a bit of a loon sometimes, but I was talking to someone yesterday, Grant Nielsen, because we've got a presentation to Mannix, and I sort of said, I said, I'm not religious, but like it is God-given right. Like everyone should have an opportunity to get a house. You should have an opportunity to be able to put down a deposit, buy a block of land, build a house, or buy a unit or whatever it is. And if you look at the stats of home ownership compared to, say, a decade ago, 20 years ago, it's getting less and less and less. That's not to say we can't change it, but there's a lot of work to be done. And from my point of view, the state government, I'm not going to get into politics, and the council as well, is there's been a number of situations where decisions have been made that haven't been beneficial to that land supply piece. The other thing I'll touch on briefly, just to finish off the VPA piece, is one of the reasons why the state government have done the 70-30 split is, as we all know, they don't have a lot of money. And if you pivot back towards established areas, what's the difference between unestablished areas? Well, all of the infrastructure is supposedly there. I suppose the big question is the infrastructure that's supposedly there. If you're dumping a heap of people in there, does it have the ability to be able to cope with that? Whereas if you look at greenfields, you do have to drag all of the infrastructure out, which there is, developers pay for a lot of that, but also there's a lot of cost that gets borne by the government. And that's one of the other drivers as to why they've done the pivot, is they can't really afford to pull that stuff out.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, I understand where they're coming from. I think it raises a few flags for me though, like knowing that the cost of inner is far more to build. I mean, the build costs I'm talking about, I mean, let alone the land cost. Like it's a fair bit more complexity to building in what we'd call the brown fields.
Well,
so,
it's also it's timing. Like 7-star, amazing. I think it's brilliant. I just think like we should have been doing it years ago. Was it the right time to do it now? And it's the same stuff with a lot of the taxes. We'll talk about DCPs in a bit, but I think sometimes there's a level of common sense as to, like at that I didn't realise, but there's states that haven't necessarily pulled the trigger on 7-star yet. There's states that have sort of pushed it further down the track.
Yeah.
Like these things are all well and good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just timing. Like have a bit of a think. But yeah, I mean, there's lots of headwinds, but the flip side is there's lots of opportunity. I think the other thing, if you sort of go, if the land supply piece is, and also housing, like I don't know if you guys are across the housing targets. So that was a big at the HIA Green Awards last week. The head of I think the CEO or one of the higher ups in the HIA was just talking about which states hit the housing target and which states missed. Victoria actually was pretty much bang on for their housing target. Why will we bang on for the housing target? Because we're coming out the tail end of a boom. Doubtful we're going to hit the housing target in the next 12 months. But if everyone's pro supply for people to get in houses because we need these houses, we need to make it as streamlined and as efficient as possible to be able to do that. So there's a bit of work to be done.
Yeah,
seems like one contradicts the other, doesn't it? Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to. It is. It's 100%. It is. It's 100%. Like the interesting. Like if you look at Geelong as an example, I nearly fell off my chair. So because there's two. There's the federal government sort of 5-year plan, but then Victoria government came out with a 2051 draft housing statement. So Geelong, there's 127,000 houses in Geelong. Right, 127,000 houses. The target, the over and above, how many new homes that they want by 2051 is 138,000. So by 2051, so it's about 5,000 houses per year, which if you then extrapolate that in regards to what's the per annum population growth, that's 3%. Now, during COVID, so from 2016, during COVID, pre-COVID, 2016 to 2021, according to the census, Geelong's annual population growth was 3%. Yeah, so it's possible, but then the flip side is that was driven by this crazy. Who would have thought there's a pandemic? everyone gets locked up in Melbourne, let's flee to the regions, how we sort of got that number. So you're right. Like there is some really great sort of aspirational targets. Even, and you guys could probably talk better to this at the HIAs, if you get a lot of land and then you need to build a lot of houses, what do you need to build the houses? What the trades?
People and materials.
Yeah, they were talking about, there was a couple of panels about apprentices in Tassie. They're really hard to find apprentices, and it's trying to find obviously the ones that sort of come straight out of high school, but then the older ones, and then trying to keep them. Like, these are the things. You got to work back. What's the target? All right, well, then how are we going to do that? And I think that's the missing component to your point, Colin, is that there's the dreamers going, we want this, but then have you actually sat down from a practicality point of view and gone, this is how we're going to be able to do this? If you say, we're going to go to the moon, how are we going to do it? I don't know, we'll build a rocket, it'll be right, work itself out. And I feel like that's probably where we're at the moment.
Feels like a classic case of the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. It's a lack of communication, lack of understanding, and good intentions, but
100% great intentions.
Talking to each other, it's like cannibalizing your own product in a business. It sounds a bit like that, but anyway.
It rolls on from that though too, Cole. You know, they've announced this week that they're going to reduce the number of students, overseas students coming in to be able to study here by 22,000 people a year. Well, then those people often end up staying here. They bring money in from overseas. They're funding their own way through. Like, they're people who actually can often afford. They can afford to come and study here. They can afford to buy a home here more often than not. They've got some level of wealth overseas that they can bring into the country, and they're now reducing that. So it just adds to the whole mix. It's a bit of a muzzle at the moment, really.
And that's really, that is a product of, it's the whole big Australia, but that's a product of going, we're going to really struggle. The thing about the net overseas migration is 50% of those people traditionally within 2 years would have a mortgage, to your point, Darren.
Yeah.
And also, like, they're skilled migrants coming over. And the student component and net overseas migration post-COVID is obviously booming. A lot of that is students. But they come over, they live, they rent, they spend money in the economy. I just think it's like, I actually think Big Australia is a really good thing. It's just we need to get the back end, the ability to be able to then house everyone. We need to get that right. And that's what a lot of what the UDIO does, which is sort of working through. We've got, I think, 20 people on the committee, and then there's subcommittees. I'm in the Greenfields committee, but they're looking at a number of different things in regards to how can they work with the council in a consultative way, the state government, to try and obviously get the best outcome.
Yep.
Now, mate, out between Geelong and Bacchus Marsh, so in that western, is it really the Western Plains through there almost? Would that be what it's called? They've recently discovered a what was thought to be extinct, I think, an earless dragon. I was going to say lizard, but it's a dragon. Sounds scary, doesn't it? Mate,
well,
chop a reed of dragons. It's chopped its ears off. It's like mad.
But
these things are obviously delayed a whole lot of development at the moment, and things have been put on pause because they're doing a whole lot of investigation into this dragon.
Yeah.
Tell us all about it, mate. What's the go with this dragon?
Well, I thought when I heard, because as I said, I work on, sort of disclaimer, work on Lovely Banks, which is those developers. It's a range of well-known developers. I've been sort of working on that for well over a decade, but sort of really sort of trying to push it through the last couple of years. And there had been, you speak to the developer and they'd be, right, well, we were, this was the time frame and now this is the time frame. So it's a variety of things over the time that sort of cropped up. But the most recent one was the Earless Dragon, which I thought it was a stitch up. I thought it was a joke. I'm like, what do you mean? You found a lizard that was extinct, and apart from the fact it's earless, so it's like a snake with legs, I suppose. So it's in Parwin, apparently. I found one. It's in the zoo. So that's amazing. Like, there's an extinct animal that's been found. And this then goes to I mean, it's the left hand talking to the right hand, but it's common sense, right? So then what they did, and if you Google it, you can find it. They then worked out, and this is not sort of it's different departments to obviously the planning side of things. It's actually driven, my understanding is from the federal government. And if anyone's watching this and I'm wrong, certainly let me know. But they then did this map showing the potential habitat for the Earless Dragon. If you Google it, it's west, it's the Metro West, obviously, Bacchus Marsh, all the way down to Torquay. Like, it was extinct. If it lived in all those areas, would people have not seen it? Like, have we been seeing these lizards? Is it plentiful? So that was the first thing. And then what that happened is the relevant developers in certain areas, to push their projects ahead, they then themselves had to fund, right? So the developer is paying for the audit to find the habitat. So firstly, you go, all right, well, is there a habitat here? And most developments, you're going to find it's farmland. There's no habitat there, right? So to find the habitat, and then they're obviously going to fund the cost to actually do the audit for people to go down and actually try and find the lizard. So that's happening at the moment. I think it's being finalised. But what it has meant, which is common sense but also frustrating, is if you look at, say, Lovely Banks as an example, from a council point of view, they can't progress anything until that's resolved. Because let's say if they did find it, which they won't, but let's say if they did, and there's a chunk of habitat, well, that potentially then changes the whole setup of the plan. So super frustrating, because you're right, it's 300,000 plus potential lots to that supply piece. So it's not one specific decision or occurrence, and I think there's a question around DCPs, but it's this constant one after the other of specific things that seem designed to inhibit supply. And once again, like to your point earlier about Colin about the VP, like there's some really really good things about these. We should be trying to save as much of the environment as we can. But what is the overriding issue at the moment? People to be able to either afford a house or to be able to rent a home. Like there's a rental crisis going on at the moment, which is all based on supply. So extinct lizard that we didn't know existed, it was extinct since the 60s, versus someone being homeless. Like those are the two ends of the spectrum. And I feel like there's a big gap, and there's some common sense needs to come into play to be able to cater for the dragon, but also the major focus needs to be housing supply.
Yeah.
It's done well, though. Like, if it's been extinct since the 60s, she's pretty old, that lizard, that dragon. Like 50 years old. 60 years old.
It's like
60 years old, mate. How good's this thing doing?
If you found it, right, he's like going, oh, that's an interesting lizard. I haven't seen one of those. Like this, and there's been, I haven't sort of asked, but like, how did they find it? Like, is it someone's walked by, so that's an interesting lizard, we'll pick him up, take him to the zoo, or were they specific? I don't know. There's a fair bit to it. It's been in the news a fair bit as well. So, but it is funny whenever you talk to people about it, there is a level of sort of absurdity to it when you talk about that is the specific thing. Like it would have delayed the new growth corridors to the north of Geelong by, I reckon, maybe 12, 18 months. Which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a fair bit. Like,
look, the upside would be I'm being a bit cheeky a minute ago, but the upshot would be that they find a colony of these little earless dragons, and they're able to set some land aside for them to live peacefully into the future, and that would be a pretty cool little scenario to say, shit, we found something that we didn't think was around anymore, and that's now hanging around, and we've set some land aside for it to live a peaceful life ongoing forever. And that would be pretty cool. But like you say, they found one. Shit.
Well, there must be a couple because they're breeding them. But I mean, it's not just the earless dragon. There's the golden sun moth. There's the growling grass frog.
Yeah.
There's a multitude of these. I know there's a project in the southeast. There was a specific bird. In addition to that, then there's the whole, which we probably won't talk about in this, but then there's the whole cultural heritage management stuff as well. Like from a developer's point of view, I mean, the risk reward, potentially you can make some good money. But geez, the torturous way that you have to basically birth a project, decades. I don't know whether I'd have the fortitude to be able to do it. So
it does lead into, I guess, for people to take away. I mean, it's not easy being a developer. Like I think the assumption is the developer buys a farm, puts lots there, and makes a bucket load of money from it. But there's a fair bit of work that goes on in the background and over a number of years to get it to that point, and then the requirements over and above. It's not just a block of land. You've got to contribute to infrastructure and the parks and the schools and this and then that. So it probably leads to the next question we got here. I'm talking about DCPs. So that's actually development contributions plans. So do you want to just share a bit, Ben, what that is, how it works?
Yeah, so I'll sort of speak to a high level because there's a fair bit to it. And to your point, Colin, about people just assume, developer buys the land, then they cut it up, build the blocks, push up price, make lots of money. It's not the case. DCP, so it's basically a document, talks about a lot of things, but a component to that is it puts a number on the developer contributions, sort of per net NDA, so developer per hectare. So to give you a point of reference, and so that money goes towards very important things within an area. You mentioned parks. So there's a lot of infrastructure that either the developer would build, on behalf of the relevant authorities, or potentially maybe there's cash contributions and stuff like that. So it's pretty complex, but recently the specific number had been released for the Cranberry Road PSP. So there's 2 active precinct structure plans. I spoke about the one that Lovely Banks is in, which is the Alco Road East PSP. So Lovely Banks to the north, Cranberry Road is sort of to the west. Beautiful, beautiful part of Geelong. So for reference, Armstrong Creek East, which launched in 2010, is, and I've invested in there heavily. I've had family members live out there. I'm very emotionally attached to their area. Certainly Warrelly and Armstrong Mount are probably they are 2 of the best projects in Victoria. They both won at different stages Master Plan Community of the Year. They are exemplar projects. So the DCP contribution for Armstrong Creek East, which is where Warrelly was $354,067 per hectare. Okay. Now it's a while ago, and as you guys know, being in the building industry, costs go up. For Cranberry Road, it's 1.6 million. So that's a significant increase. In addition to that, you have a social affordable housing levy, which sits on top of that, which is 357,000. Okay. So what you get is, from a developer's point of view, it's about $2 million. So for Cranberry Road, $2 million that they have to either contribute or build for the council. So, because I spoke about the land supply bit, and I'm going to be presenting at the UDI summit at the end of the year. And I've presented there 2 years in a row, and I've spoken about land supply, and I feel like when I get up the next time, they're going to go, oh, it's the guy that bloody rabbits on about land supply. We're actually going to change it a little bit, because land supply is really important. But the last piece of that is viability. So if you're a developer and you've purchased land, now whether that's to develop blocks of land or maybe to build an apartment, if you can't make any money out of it, and this is where those DC, like that Cranberry Road DCP, like $2 million, it starts to get to the point where, from a developer's point of view, it's not worth it. So even if you have thousands of potential blocks of land, if it doesn't make sense from a business point of view to develop that land will just sit there, right? Now, the thing about the 1.6 million is, and I was actually trying to find the document last night, and I couldn't find it, but in there's an actual itemized list of the specific things. Because what the UDI is going to do, or is in the process of doing, is we were going to compare. So Marshall is also, there's a sort of a PCP PSP that's nearing completion in Marshall. And they're about $1 million per hectare. So what we're going to do, the UDA, is basically line up the line items within the Marshall PSP and then compare it to Armstrong Creek. So what potentially has happened is it's called scope creep. So as the years have gone by, what the council want has the list, their wish list has gone over and above. So it comes back to that common sense piece, okay? And I use a good analogy, like if I'm going to build an investment property, I'll obviously want to get the best possible block I can and build the best possible house. But depending on my budget, I'm going to make compromises. I'm also going to think about if I have to sell that house, is it in line? Is it of a reasonable standard? I don't want to overspec it. I don't want to underspec it, okay? But potentially maybe if costs go up, build costs go up, maybe I have to reduce some things in that. So where we're at the moment is the council have got their, from my understanding from talking to different people, this is their wish list. This is what we want. Yep, everything is in there. And ideally, there needs to be a level of consultation as we go through to actually bring that down to a more manageable point of view, because if it's not viable, it's not going to get built. Housing supply, land supply means nothing if a developer, because they're to get the biscuit, you got to risk it. Yeah, they're the ones putting their own money in. They should be obligated to be able to make some money. And at the current DCP rates for Cremery Road, and the assumption would be that Alco Road East would be similar, if not more, it's potentially not viable. It's never going to get out of the ground.
I did read somewhere the other day that they're expecting a 350 square metre block when it first launches to be somewhere around about $400,000, which is significant for that area. You know, like if you look at the corridor, that's bloody expensive to kick off. And that's to your point of, will people even buy it? And that's the juggle. And I think the other part in that is, I read also, I thought it was one of the greatest lines I've seen of late. It said they might start advertising land for sale, $200,000 plus government fees and charges.
That's good. No, it's like the cars. Yeah, 100%. Because it's not even like we're focusing on DCPs at the moment. There's a whole raft of state government taxes that sit on that, under that as well. You're right. It was, I think it's Andrew Perkins that highlighted that specific figure. Because and let's just say, look, it stays the way it is. You're right, 350 square metre block rolls out at 400,000. It just means that ultimately the reason why it was created is, and like the DCPs, this, I don't know if it come up in your studies, but there's a whole clever and creative corridor. It's this whole sort of transit sort of thing that winds its way through the new growth corridors, which once again, if you look at the renders, it is amazing. But you start to sort of go, is it in the current environment, is it possible? But it potentially means that the people that can afford to buy land and build a new house, it's not your first home buyers, it's your second and subsequents. They're the ones in the market. They've got the equity. It's retirees, downsizers, investors. The people that get frozen out of this is the first home buyers. Yeah. They get pushed to further and further out, or they get pushed to the 1 or 2 bedroom apartments. So they just can't afford, like if you're a first home buyer in Armstrong Creek at the moment, if you're a single person, you can't afford to buy a block of land, build a house. You just can't. Yeah. It's impossible. So no, like that's, I mean, I know it was sort of tongue in cheek, but it would be interesting if a developer did roll out, because I think this is and I work for developers, but to say that they get stigmatized for who they are, like it's just, I'm obviously an investor, which I know we sort of spoke about, and some of the stuff that was coming out, especially from the state government, but in regards to investors, like you're horrible people, you put the rent up. In Geelong, as an example, right, my understanding, total housing stock for rentals, 98% has been supplied by the private market. Yeah. So you would think those people would be celebrated, because once again, they're risking the money, they're building a house, they're putting a tenant in. The social housing component, I think, is amazing that we're doing that. And I think we need to move past the stigma of what people traditionally think is social housing. It's not, it's something that's really, really needed. But unless the government's going to just roll out and build it all themselves, there needs to be some more consultative work going on. from a supply point of view.
So maybe to wrap up this episode, Ben, is it the right time to buy?
Yes. Yeah. Well,
There it
everything.
is. Wrapping it right now. Sorry.
No, it's not. No, terrible time to buy. No, everything I've said, and this. So I've sort of been talking from I'm on the EDA from a developer's point of view, from core project point of view. If I put my personal investor hat on, right, and I've bought land, I've pretty much averaged a block of land over the last 8 years. And I've bought in good markets, I've bought in terrible markets. I remember I sat there, it was Metricon Home Solutions, Kalula 17, right, in Armstrong Central. I remember signing the contract, right? I think Warley had done I think we might have been -4 for the month. We'd had more cancellations. This was, I think it was 2018. What are you doing? This is the most stupidest thing. The phones weren't ringing, there was no inquiry. That was my best investment ever. So from my point of view, if you take all of what I've rabbited on about in regards to supply, if you put your investment hat on, it means that property prices will continue to go up. It is a basic mathematical calculation. There's too many people coming to Australia, and so our population growth is too high, and our housing supply is too low to be able to keep prices under control. So it's terrible that potentially first-time buyers won't have an opportunity to get in. But if you're an investor, and then the other thing is, because of this supply piece, if you look at most suburbs in Geelong, and most suburbs, if you go to Colac as an example, the vacancy rate in Colac is 0.7%. A healthy vacancy rate for rental properties between sort of either side of 3. So enough rental properties for enough people to rent for the rent to sort of stay level. 0.7%. Now in Armstrong Creek, it's actually over 2 at the moment. I think it's 2.3. Why is it 2.3? Because there's actually been consistent supply coming through. That's going to come to a grinding halt pretty shortly. So why do I talk about that? Well, it means property prices keep going up. So if you buy something now, and there's some amazing incentives. The average incentive in most corridors, but if you look at Geelong, is about $20,000. That's above the line, right? Under the line, I know some projects. There's one in Thomastown doing $50,000 incentives. $50,000. So incentives, property prices continue to go up. There's not enough supply, so your rental, if you're thinking investment, your gross rental yield is going to keep going up as well. So there's a raft of structural issues, but if you're purchasing property, it actually means now, if you can get your foot on something, it means you're actually going to have a really good long-term outlook, would be yes. So to answer your question, yes, it is a good time to buy. I think the next probably 6 months or so, the minute that first interest rate reduction goes, though, no developer is going to be as amenable to incentivizing you to purchase. They're going to say, interest rates have gone down. Why am I offering you $30,000? I know people are coming through, so you want to do it before that. If you wait, you've missed the boat to a certain extent.
Mate, fantastic. Couldn't agree more. I think, the time to buy is now, if you can afford to. So.
Well, and then that's the unfortunate thing as well. I think, I suppose the other thing, and that's the benefit of, if you can find a project that has got, you do amazing deals in title land. I know from a builder's point of view as well, there's some great deals out there. You can hit the ground running, you can afford to. But if you can't, go and find a block of land that's untitled off the plan. Right? Yep. You should be confident that if you put down a deposit, so 5%, if you've got it and you sign that contract, in 12 to 18 months, the cost of getting money is going to be a lot cheaper. Right? Back yourself in. And that's probably the thing. I remember I bought a block of land. I put down $1,000 and I got $1,000 back in the form of an Any Store gift card. So my net contribution was $0. I actually didn't have $1,000 at the time. I had to pay it by credit card, right? That was all I contributed to that purchase, right? Now, I still had to settle it. So I was in no way in the right position to buy it then. But it wasn't titling for 18 months. So sometimes it's just lock yourself in and then have a crack and then you'll be fine. So,
yeah, that's great.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Ben. Some great insights, and I think some great lessons for people to, I guess, about the developer side of stuff, which we weren't Because quite a few things we weren't aware of there, and yeah, some good insights, current market, and all those things. So thank you for taking the time, Ben, and everyone who's watched or listened. Thank you as well. If you enjoyed it, please jump on, leave us a 5-star review on whatever platform that you're on. If you've got any questions, topic ideas, homebuildinghub.com.au, jump on there, let us know. And yeah, thanks, Daz. Thanks, Ben. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate the opportunity.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Home Building Hub. As part of the podcast, we have to be a little careful to cover ourselves on a legal standpoint. So we do have a disclaimer. Whilst we're all about providing value to you, this podcast should not be considered legal or financial advice. It does contain general information only, and you should seek out independent professional advice on your own personal situation before you make any legal or financial decisions.
1